5 years ago, Adelaide was one of the cheapest capital cities in the country. Today, the average house here costs more than it does in Melbourne. And if you've owned that house, chances are you've made over $500,000. No renovating, no flipping, you haven't invested a cent. The city that no one was talking about just quietly beat the second biggest city in the country, and almost no one noticed. Rewind to the start of 2020. Adelaide was the city that no one wanted. Too quiet, too small, the place that young people left to go find opportunities on the East Coast. Looking at you, Melbourne and Sydney. Melbourne, the world's reigning, most livable city, never saw it as competition. And to be fair, for decades, it probably wasn't. And then the pandemic hit, and being cheap became one of the most valuable advantages that a city could have. Because what happened next, almost nobody predicted. Here's how far home values have moved across the capital cities. Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide, doubled. Sydney, up 46%. Melbourne, 22%. Barely above inflation. Same country, same 5 years, different planets. The typical Adelaide home now costs over $1 million. This was unthinkable just a few years ago. Do the maths. That house has gained $200 in value every day, including weekends, for the last 5 years. And in the last 12 months alone, added over 100 grand. That's more money than many Australians earn from a full-time income in an entire year. The house has out-earned the person living in it. But here's where the story actually starts to become almost unbelievable. Somehow, in the middle of all this, Adelaide's median dwelling value overtook Melbourne's. On a combined dwelling basis, Adelaide now sits above Melbourne. A century's worth of pecking order, gone. Now, I want to be straight with you here, because part of this headline is a cheat. Part of that gap is a quirk, because Melbourne has significantly more apartments than Adelaide, and that brings down the overall dwelling cost quite considerably. So it's not a perfectly clean comparison. But strip it back to houses only, they're now basically level. Adelaide, fractionally ahead. For decades, Adelaide was the affordable alternative. Today, that advantage basically gone. But none of this happened by accident. Four forces stacked on top of each other. Adelaide went into the pandemic cheap, and when affordability evaporated elsewhere in the country, buyers started hunting for value, and Adelaide was it. For decades, South Australia had a problem. Young people just left. Job opportunities, etc., all existed interstate. The pandemic changed that. For the first time, that trend started to reverse. More people moved to South Australia than left it, and the population trend started to run above its pre-pandemic levels. The rental vacancy fell to about 0.7%, practically nothing. Listings stayed tight, so buyers were competing over a very small pool of homes. Mining, agriculture, and a $30 billion defence building pipeline gave real confidence in the state's economy and future prospects. The city that people used to leave was now creating jobs. Which brings us to the question that everyone's asking. The boom isn't accelerating anymore. It's slowing down. Monthly growth has fallen from 1.6% at its peak to 0.5% in May. And June, flat. In other words, a market that's been growing at full speed has suddenly hit the brakes. That sounds bad. But flatline isn't falling, and that's the whole difference. Because while Adelaide stalled, Melbourne and Sydney actually went backwards. Both down over the June quarter. Adelaide's still holding its record highs, and Domain's even predicting that we could reach fresh highs through 2027, even as interstate markets fall. So what do you take from this? One, the cheap city isn't cheap anymore. It takes the average Adelaide buyer a decade to save a deposit, and the average renter is going to be handing over 30% of their income in rent. The affordability edge that built the boom is the exact thing that the boom destroyed. Two, the boring bet won. The quiet, overlooked, nothing's happening market outran the glamour cities for 5 years straight. The lesson here isn't to go out and buy Adelaide tomorrow. That affordability is well and truly gone now. It's that the city you're probably ignoring now is probably the next Adelaide. 5 years ago, Sydney got the attention, Adelaide barely got a mention. Those decisions right now look very different. So, which city are we laughing at right now, and which city are we going to wish that we had bought in 5 years from now? I'd love to know your thoughts. Chuck them down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.